Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. Idaho is a big state, and it covers a lot of territory. Idaho Matters wants to take you to every corner of the Gem State by visiting all 44 counties, and we need your help to do that. Email us your story ideas at idahomatters@boisestate.edu for our new series we're calling Idaho 44. And be sure to join us each weekday at noon and 8 on Idaho Matters and travel the state with us.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Gemma Gaudette. You're listening to Idaho Matters. Well, we woke up today to an extreme heat watch from the National Weather Service for a large chunk of Idaho. That includes Silver City, Caldwell, Cambridge, Nampa, Council, even Burns and Jordan Valley in Oregon. Temperatures today in places like Boise, Grandview, Mountain Home, even Emmett, they're going to top 100 degrees. And this kind of heat is part of summer in our area, but a lot of places, that heat is getting hotter and lasting longer as our climate changes from what we're used to in the past. And we've entered wildfire season. As of Monday, there were 36 large wildfires burning in America, including 5 in Idaho, that have already burned more than 26,000 acres. And people in Minnesota have been plagued all summer by dense smoke from huge wildfires in Canada. Dr. Deborah Hendrickson sees the impact of extreme heat and wildfire smoke on kids every day in her clinic in Reno, Nevada. She's going to be talking about her experiences at the latest St. Luke's Climate and Health Series talk tomorrow. It's called A Lasting Impact, Wildfire Smoke and Pediatric Health. She's here to give us a preview and to tell us more. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Hendrickson. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay, before we get into how climate affects kids, or maybe to get into that, I want to get a little personal. You have said that you had an epiphany about all of this during the Yosemite Rim fire in 2013 when a 10-month-old baby was brought into your clinic. Can you take us back then and tell us what happened?
Yeah. So I should explain that I had a background as an environmental analyst and planner, too, before I went into medicine. So before I went to med school, I had spent 10 years doing environmental science, basically. And I'd even gone to graduate school in forestry. So I knew, that climate change was going to be a threat to the forests in the West before I started into medicine. And I was as you said, I was in my clinic one day during the 2013 Yosemite Rim fire, and ash was raining from the sky, outside, and it was just gray, and the cinders were swirling around the building. And this baby who had had a couple episodes already of wheezing in her life came in just struggling to breathe. And her mom had put like a damp baby blanket over the car seat, and it was just covered with ash. And she just looked up at me with these big brown eyes, and her chest was pulling in and she was wheezing. And her mom turned to me and she said, "Isn't it funny how you never think about breathing until you can't?" And I just realized it was this moment when my past career and my current career were coming together. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to kind of zoom out from this moment of one little baby in a small town in the West, and how this massive global process is coming down to this moment in my clinic, and then also zoom into the microscopic structures of her body and explain how it was affecting her and kind of integrate all that for people as one problem. So that was when I really began working on jotting down ideas for the book I ended up writing about this.
Well, and it's fascinating, and I love how you use, examples of what's happening to actual children to tell us what's happening to children, on a larger scale. So let's talk about how kids are affected by things like heat. You have said this is harder on kids because kids are, despite what some people think, not just little adults, not just short adults. Can we talk about that? Talk about how that affects kids, especially heat.
Yeah, and that's a common phrase in pediatrics that we say all the time. Children are not just small adults, and it's because their physiology is different. Their bodies work in ways that are different, that in ways that make them susceptible to environmental harm. Um, and so that's one of the three big reasons that they're more at risk. Another reason is that they're smaller in size, and so the same dose of air pollution or heat for a baby is greater per pound than it is for an adult, for their parent. And the third reason, which I think is really one of the major reasons that kids are so, especially small children, are so at risk, is that their organs and bodies are still developing and growing. And so if you have certain types of environmental injuries can derail that normal organ development and have lifelong implications. And when we take into account the lifelong impact of an early environmental injury, a group of researchers a few years ago estimated that almost 90% of the global disease burden of climate change is going to fall on children under 5 years old for that reason, because injury to them can have such long-term consequences.
Well, some of those organs you're talking about, as you said, develop depending on the environment they're in, like lungs. And you wrote at one point, children who are chronically exposed to particle pollution tend to have smaller, stiffer lungs. Um, I find this really terrifying, honestly, that you're going to grow up with bad lungs because you grew up in a bad air quality environment.
Yeah, and there have been a number of studies that have shown this now. The one I talked about in the book was a long-term study from Los Angeles that compared kids growing up in different quality air. And they showed pretty definitively that the quality of air you breathe when you're a child affects your lung growth because 85% of lung growth happens after birth. And we know that these pollutants kind of stunt the process by which the structures of the lung develop. And so the kids really do end up with smaller, stiffer lungs, and the immune system of the lungs is damaged as well, so that they're more prone to asthma and lung infections. And that has long-term implications for their employability, their lifespan, the long-term health problems they're going to encounter. Now, there was some good news in those studies as well. I should say that that's been replicated in cities like Boston and Toronto and other places as well. But one of the good pieces of news was that they found that kids who moved during adolescence to areas with cleaner air actually recovered 10 to 12% of their lung capacity,
Wow.
their lung function. So that is a really good argument for always trying to improve the quality of air kids are breathing because as long as they're still growing, you can get some improvement. But yeah, it has a big long-term impact. And then the other organ that we now know, that's also developing rapidly early in life is, of course, the brain. And there's a lot of new startling research about that as well.
Well, and I wanted to be sure to bring up the thing about lungs because air quality it's a particular problem in the Treasure Valley where I live. We get these inversions every year,
Yeah.
all year long, especially in winter. It can hug the wildfire smoke, the pollutants to the ground for weeks at a time. And when I was putting that together with what I was reading, you were saying about lung development, and it was, scary.
Yeah, it is frightening. And of course, parents have so much to be anxious and frightened about now. You hate to give them any more to worry about. But there's lots we can do to both try to improve air quality and protect kids from bad air quality. In terms of just urban pollutants, usually people who live further from roads, the kids seem to do a little bit better. It's like the 100 meters closest to heavily used roads seems to be the biggest danger zone. But you're right, things like inversions and wildfire smoke kind of affect everyone. And so in those cases, you have to do, personal protective mechanisms like air filters in your home or in your HVAC system. Keep an eye on your AQI app on your phone to see what the air quality is and whether you should be, we all hate masks from the pandemic, but when it's really bad outside with wildfire smoke, if your kids are old enough, having them wear an N95, or if it's a baby going under that damp baby blanket, that can help protect them as well. Whatever you can do to kind of minimize their exposure is helpful.
You use a lot of kids as examples in your book, The Air They Breathe, a pediatrician on the front lines of climate change. They're from the Reno Clinic where you work. Can we talk about some of these? You have two boys in Arizona who were hiking in extreme heat. What was their story?
Yeah, so I traveled around the country. Reno is the fastest warming city in the US, so we do have trouble with heat now, especially rising nighttime temperatures, which that's a problem around the world. Nighttime temperatures are rising faster even than daytime temperatures. But Reno is actually a better example of just the air quality impacts of climate change because of all the wildfire smoke we get from California. But I traveled to Arizona, to Phoenix, to interview the families of two boys who had collapsed while hiking on trails around Phoenix. One was a 12-year-old and one was a 14-year-old. And they were a year apart, and their stories were kind of a metaphor for me for climate change because I tried to demonstrate that the speed with which you react to heat stroke is what determines whether you live or don't. And that's kind of a metaphor for how
Yeah.
quickly we should be reacting to climate change. But these boys, with heat, we're always generating heat. That's what makes us warm. And we have to always be shunting it to the outside world. When the outside world is starting to get too hot for us, and especially if we're exercising on a hot day, it really challenges the body. And eventually your body runs out of tricks and you start to suffer heat exhaustion or heat stroke, which is what happened to these two boys.
Wow, that's just scary. And and
Mhm.
and while you're talking about something like that, which would be kind of a short-term effect, or the baby who couldn't breathe, coming in from the fire, you also talk about the long-term effect on kids, and you're worried about that as well. As we grow up in areas that have these problems. You mentioned brain development before, but there are other long-term effects too.
Yeah, brain development is a big one. That is research that's really exploded in the last 10 years, and it's, fascinating and upsetting because we know that now, like particle pollution, which is, the most dangerous pollution in wildfire smoke, that it can reach the brain even prenatally through the placenta,
Oh,
um,
wow.
and through the blood and also through the nose. There are some series of studies from Mexico City that showed that kids who are breathing the particles through their nose, it ascends up through the olfactory nerve into the brain. So anyway, and these kids had lower testing scores on at school, and they scored more poorly in all kinds of ways, and they were being set up for later Alzheimer's and dementia. Um, but there's all sorts of injuries that are associated with early lifetime exposure to heat and air pollution, like birth defects of various kinds have been associated with prenatal exposure to both of those things. And of course, the injury, like one of the boy who survived the heat stroke in Arizona, he had severe injuries and was hospitalized for months and took a year to recover, really, until he was really feeling back to himself and lost, a whole semester of school. So it's not just you're in the hospital for a day and you get out, it's a very serious injury. And if I could just say one more thing about those Arizona boys, everybody knows Phoenix is hot, but one of the points I tried to make in the chapter is that uh, Phoenix, like everywhere, is heating up rapidly and having worse and worse temperature spikes every year, and is rapidly approaching a point where it's our fifth largest city, but it's approaching a point where people won't be able to go outside much at all certain months of the year. So anyway.
That's scary.
Yes, I know. So much to be scared about. I know. So,
Okay. Oh, well, we're speaking with Dr. Deborah Hendrickson. She's the author of the book, The Air They Breathe, and she's talking about the health impacts that extreme heat and wildfire smoke have on kids. She'll be talking more about this tomorrow as part of St. Luke's Climate and Health series. And let's move past the scary, or at least part of the scary, and look at possible solutions. You have called parents the sleeping giant in the climate fight, and that they need to get involved. So I guess that's the question. How do parents get involved? How can parents make a difference or make a change or do something to help their kids?
Exactly. And that's really the main point is not to scare people, but to get people activated because there is still a window of time in which rapidly cutting greenhouse gases would have a huge effect on our children's future. And there are positive signs from around the world. You know, China is rapidly building out its renewable energy infrastructure. They're going to probably be the first electro state that runs completely off renewable energy. That's their goal, and they're meeting their Paris deadlines ahead of schedule. And Europe is also doing well. So there's lots of good news as well. But for parents, you know, here in the US, of course, we have a lot of backward trending in this problem right now in terms of public policy. So getting involved at the local level, you know, think of you and your child as the center of a series of spheres. And this, at the center is your home, your car, and then maybe the next sphere out is your school, your job, and then your neighborhood, your city, your county, and your state. What can you do at each of those levels? And if you get involved with groups like Mom's Clean Air Force or I think there's something called Boise Community Climate Action Committee, and there's also Citizens Climate Lobby that has a Boise chapter. So if you get involved with one of these groups, they'll alert you to when your local community is engaging in issues that are relevant, like policy decisions about electricity generation or how you can get renewable energy to your home. So that's where I usually say to start is, you know, join with other people in your community who are also worried, other parents, and just do something and try to build on that. The school, your kid's school is a great place to get active because you can look to see if you can get electric school buses. You know, kids who stand by diesel school buses inhale a lot of these dangerous pollutants. So that's even if you weren't worried about climate change, these electric school buses are a better option for their health. And trying to convert schools to renewable, like heat pumps instead of traditional HVAC systems with solar panels to power them. You know, there's lots of opportunities, and I go through some of these in the book, but parents need to get alert to what's going on and wake up. And if I have just a minute more, I was going to mention the EPA endangerment finding.
Yes.
Yes. So the EPA recently announced that they want to rescind the endangerment finding, which is basically the legal basis that allows them to regulate greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. So to rescind this finding knocks out a major pillar of what the federal government has been doing to try to address global warming. But parents can comment on this. There's video testimony that's going to be opened up on August 19th and 20th, and you can submit written comments until September 15th. And I really think that if a lot of parents and others who are concerned submit comments and try to prevent them from doing this, it could make a difference. It's a major, major ruling that we really have to try to preserve our chances of preventing that catastrophic warming.
You know, you talk a lot about optimism and pessimism. You've said there's no good future for kids if things don't change. Should we be pessimistic about the future? I think I read you have 3 kids. Are you optimistic that parents can
Uh,
make a difference?
Yeah, 3 kids and a granddaughter now too.
Oh,
I just saw her. She's you know, and she's so beautiful and so sweet. And yeah, I worry about it a lot, like everyone. You know, I it's a really frustrating thing because we totally have all the technology we need to solve this problem, and China's demonstrating that right now. This is a political problem. And so political problems, you know, should be solvable by human beings, all getting activated to do something about it. If we do nothing and we stay on the trajectory we're on, the high emissions scenario is really it'll yes, it's a danger to civilization and our kids' future. You know, we've made so much progress in children's health in the last century because of civilization, because of health infrastructure and all the advances we've made in public health. But all of that is endangered by this trend we're on. So that's why it's really an existential issue for anybody who cares about children and the future that they're facing. We all have to step up for them and do what we can.
well, Dr. Hendrickson, thanks for coming on and sharing a little with us today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We've been speaking with Dr. Deborah Hendrickson. She's the author of the book, The Air They Breathe. And we've been talking about the health impacts that extreme heat and wildfire smoke have on our kids. She's going to be speaking tomorrow as part of St. Luke's Climate and Health Series. We're going to put a link to the series on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org.
This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudette.